It happened on a Sunday afternoon, just as I was finishing my crossword and listening to the radio. My son, David, called and asked if he could stop by. I thought nothing of it. He rarely visited without a reason, but I always welcomed him with open arms. He arrived with his wife and 2 kids in tow, their faces tight with anticipation. We sat in the living room, the air thick with unspoken words, until David finally cleared his throat. "Dad, we've been talking," he began, glancing at his wife for support. "It's getting cramped at our place, and with the kids growing, we thought it'd be best if we all moved in here. It just makes sense. You've got the space, and we could help out around the house." I stared at him, the words echoing in my mind. My home, my sanctuary, was about to be overrun, and not once had anyone asked how I felt about it. His wife was already eyeing the guest room. The kids were arguing over who'd get the bigger bedroom, and David was talking about rearranging the furniture. I felt invisible, as if my years of sacrifice and hard work meant nothing more than a convenient solution to their problems. I tried to speak, but my voice faltered. I looked at my son, searching for any sign of understanding. But he was already making plans, barely noticing the pain in my eyes. In that moment, I realized my comfort, my wishes, my very presence in my own home didn't matter. But what I did next, no one in my family saw coming. It's funny how a single conversation can make you question the meaning of a lifetime. After my son and his family left that afternoon, I sat in my old armchair, the one with the worn arms and the faded cushion, and let my mind wander back through the years. The house was quiet, but my memories were loud, echoes of laughter, the clatter of tools, the soft voice of my late wife humming in the kitchen. I'd built this place from the ground up. Every nail and board a testament to the life I'd tried to give my family. I remember the early days, when my son was just a boy with skinned knees and a wild imagination. Back then, money was tight and time was even tighter, but I did everything I could to make sure he never felt the weight of it. I worked long hours at the factory, sometimes double shifts, just to keep food on the table and a roof over our heads. I'd come home bone-tired, hands stained with grease. But the sight of him running down the hall to greet me made every ache worth it. I'd scoop him up, listen to his stories about school and friends, and promise him that as long as I was around, he'd always have a place to call home. My wife and I poured our hearts into this house. She planted the rose bushes out front, the ones that still bloom every spring. And I built the swing set in the backyard where David learned to pump his legs and touch the sky. We didn't have much, but we had each other, and that was enough. Every holiday, every birthday, every ordinary Tuesday was a chance to make memories. I can still see David's face the first time he rode his bike without training wheels. The pride in his eyes when he brought home a good report card. The way he'd fall asleep on the couch with his head in his mother's lap as he grew older. The sacrifices changed, but they never stopped. When he wanted to go to college, I picked up extra shifts, sold my old truck, and dipped into the savings I'd been putting away for retirement. I told myself it was worth it, that every penny spent was an investment in his future. I drove him to campus that first day, helped him carry his boxes up 3 flights of stairs, hugged him goodbye with a lump in my throat. I wanted him to have every opportunity I never did. When he got married, I welcomed his wife into our family with open arms. I helped them with the down payment on their first apartment, fixed leaky faucets, and babysat the grandkids whenever they needed a break. I was always just a phone call away, ready to lend a hand or an ear. I never wanted to be a burden, only a support, steady presence in a world that's always changing. After my wife passed, the house felt emptier, but I kept it up the best I could. I tended the garden, kept the rooms tidy, and waited for the days when David and his family would visit. Those visits grew less frequent as the years went by, but I cherished every one. I'd cook their favorite meals, dust off the old board games, and listen to the grandkids' stories about school and friends. I tried to make the house feel warm and welcoming, a place where they'd always want to return, but somewhere along the way things shifted. The calls became less about checking in and more about favors. Could I watch the kids? Could I lend a little money? Could I help with this or that? I never minded. Not really. I told myself, that's what family does. But I started to notice that my own needs, my own comfort, were rarely part of the conversation. When I mentioned a leaky roof or a doctor's appointment, the subject would change. Or I'd get a promise to look into it that never quite materialized. Still, I held on to the hope that in the end all my sacrifices would mean something. That I'd earned a little peace, a little respect, maybe even a bit of gratitude. I dreamed of quiet mornings in my garden, of holidays spent with family, of being surrounded by people who remembered all the little things I'd done for them. Now, sitting in the silence of my living room, I realized how far I'd drifted from those dreams. The house I'd built with love and sweat was no longer my sanctuary, but a convenience for others. My years of sacrifice had become invisible. Taken for granted by the very people I'd given everything for, it's a strange kind of loneliness. The kind that comes not from being alone, but from being overlooked by those you love most. I looked around at the photos on the mantel. My wife's gentle smile, David's gap-toothed grin, the grandkids in their Halloween costumes, and wondered if they remembered the man who'd built this home, or if I'd simply become part of the furniture. Expected to be there, but never truly seen. The dreams I'd carried for so long felt fragile now, threatened by the reality of being sidelined in my own life. But as I sat there, surrounded by the echoes of all I'd given, I felt something shift inside me, a quiet resolve, a sense that maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop waiting for appreciation that would never come. It's a peculiar thing. The way betrayal doesn't always arrive with a bang. Sometimes it seeps in quietly, like water under a door, until you look down and realize your feet are soaked and cold. That's how it was with David and his family. I can't point to a single moment when I stopped being the head of my own household and became, instead, a convenient afterthought. But looking back, the signs were all there. After that Sunday, the calls from David came more frequently, but not for the reasons I'd once hoped. He'd ask about the layout of the house, how many closets there were, whether the basement stayed dry in the winter. His wife Linda started dropping hints about how much easier it would be for the kids to have their own rooms, how she could finally have a proper home office, how nice it would be to have someone around to help with chores. The way she said it, I could almost believe she was doing me a favor. I tried to voice my concerns gently at first. "It's a big change," I said one evening, as David rattled off a list of things they'd need to move. "Are you sure this is what's best for everyone?" He brushed me off with a laugh. "Dad, you'll love having the kids around. It'll keep you young. And we'll help out, I promise." But I could hear the impatience in his voice, the way he'd already made up his mind. My feelings were just a speed bump on the road to his plans. The next weekend, they arrived with boxers. Boxers I hadn't agreed to. Boxers I hadn't even known were coming. Linda started measuring the guest room windows for new curtains. The kids ran through the halls, arguing over which room would be theirs. David was in the garage, talking about clearing out my old tools to make space for his own. I stood in the kitchen, watching my world rearrange itself around me. It felt smaller than I ever had before. It wasn't just the invasion of space. It was the way they spoke about my home, as if it were already theirs. Linda complained about the outdated kitchen. The kids whined about the slow Wi-Fi, and David made plans to modernize the living room. No one asked if I wanted any of these changes. No one even asked if I was comfortable with them moving in. I was expected to smile, to be grateful for the company, to step aside and let them take over. The final straw came one evening. After a long day of listening to their plans and watching my home disappear, piece by piece, I overheard Linda on the phone with her sister, her voice low but clear enough to carry down the hall. "It's just easier this way," she said. "He's old, and he's got the space. Besides, it's not like he has anywhere else to go." The words hit me like a slap, not like I had anywhere else to go. As if I were a piece of furniture, something to be moved and managed. Not a person with a life and a history in these walls. That night, I sat alone in my bedroom, the door closed against the noise of my own family. I looked around at the familiar things, the quilt my wife had made, the photos from our first years in the house, the books I'd collected over a lifetime. I realized with a kind of cold clarity that I was being pushed out of my own life, my comfort, my wishes. My very presence had become an inconvenience. I thought about all the years I'd spent putting David first, about the sacrifices I'd made so he could have a better life. I remembered the promises I'd made to my wife, to always protect our home, to keep it a place of love and respect. And now here I was, a stranger in my own house, my voice drowned out by the needs and wants of others. The pain of that realization was sharp, but beneath it something else began to grow, a quiet, simmering resolve. I'd spent my whole life making room for others, sacrificing my own happiness for the sake of family. But now I saw things clearly. I was more than a spare room, more than a set of hands to help with chores. I was a man who deserved respect, a man who had earned the right to decide what happened in his own home. As I sat there, the ache in my chest slowly gave way to determination. I realized I had to stand up for myself. If my son and his family couldn't see my worth, then maybe it was time I reminded them. I wasn't ready to be erased, to become invisible in the place I'd built with my own two hands. Not now, not ever. That night, I barely slept. I lay in the dark, listening to the muffled sounds of my son's family settling into rooms that had once been filled with my own memories. The house felt different, crowded, restless, and yet I had never felt so alone. I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing with questions I couldn't answer. Was I being selfish for wanting my own space? Was I wrong to feel hurt, to want a say in what happened under my own roof? Or was this just what getting old meant, being pushed aside, expected to be grateful for whatever scraps of attention were left? I thought about all the years I'd spent making sacrifices, about the promises I'd made to my wife to keep this house a place of warmth and respect. I wondered if I'd failed somewhere along the way, if I had made it too easy for David to take me for granted. Maybe I should have spoken up sooner, set firmer boundaries, made it clear that my comfort mattered too. But I'd always believed that family meant putting others first. That love was measured in what you were willing to give now. Lying there in the dark, I realized how much I'd given up. My peace, my privacy, my sense of belonging. I remembered the quiet mornings in the garden, the evenings spent reading by the window. The simple joy of knowing that this house was truly mine. Those moments felt like a different life, one that was slipping further away with every box that arrived. Every decision made without me. I thought about my own father, a man of few words but strong principles. He used to say, "A man's home is his castle, but it's also his heart. Don't let anyone take that from you." I'd always admired his quiet dignity, the way he stood his ground when it mattered. I wondered what he would think if he saw me now, shrinking into the background, letting others decide my fate. The pain of being unwanted, being treated as an afterthought, settled deep in my bones. I felt old in a way I never had before, not because of the years, but because of the way I was being made to feel invisible. I questioned my worth, wondered if I was just in the way, if maybe it would be easier for everyone if I simply faded into the background. But as the first light of dawn crept through the curtains, something inside me shifted. I remembered the pride I'd felt building this home, the love I'd poured into every corner. I remembered the promise I'd made to myself and to my wife, to never let this house become anything less than a place of respect. I realized I still had a choice, that I didn't have to accept being sidelined in my own life. I wasn't ready to disappear. Not yet. There was still a part of me that believed I deserved better, that my years of sacrifice and love meant something. I decided right then and there that I wouldn't let anyone, no matter how close, make me feel like a stranger in my own home. I would find my voice again, and I would use it. The next morning, I awoke with a heaviness in my chest, but also a strange sense of clarity. The house was already alive with the sounds of my son's family, pots clanging in the kitchen, the grandkids arguing over the bathroom, Linda's voice echoing down the hall as she made plans for the day. I sat on the edge of my bed, listening, and realized that I was no longer a part of this household. I was an afterthought, a shadow in the place I'd built with my own hands. I moved quietly through my morning routine, making coffee and sitting at the kitchen table, unnoticed by the others. I watched as Linda rearranged my cupboards, moving my favorite mug to a shelf I couldn't reach. David was on the phone talking about new furniture and renovations, as if I wasn't even there. The grandkids ran through the living room, knocking over a photo of my late wife. No one stopped to pick it up. I bent down, gently setting the frame upright, and felt a wave of sadness wash over me. That was the moment I knew I couldn't stay. Not like this. I'd spent my whole life making sacrifices for my family, but I'd never agreed to give up my dignity. I finished my coffee, set the mug in the sink, and walked to my bedroom. I opened the closet and pulled out an old suitcase, the same one I'd used on family vacations years ago. It felt strange, packing my own things in my own house, but with every shirt I folded, every pair of socks I tucked away, I felt a little of my strength return. I moved slowly, careful not to make a scene. I didn't want a confrontation, didn't want to argue or plead for understanding. I just wanted to reclaim a piece of myself. I packed only what I needed: some clothes, my shaving kit, a few books, and the photo of my wife. I left the rest behind, a silent testament to the life I'd built and the memories I refused to let be trampled. Before I left, I sat at my desk and wrote a note. I kept it simple but honest. David, I love you and your family, but I can't live like this. This house was my home, and I deserve to feel respected in it. I need some time and space to think about what comes next. Please take care of the place, and remember what it meant to your mother and me. I left the note on the kitchen table, weighed down with my old house key. I called my old friend Frank, who lived across town. We hadn't seen much of each other in recent years, but he'd always said his door was open. When I explained the situation, he didn't hesitate. "Come on over, Joe. You'll have your own room, and we'll catch up like old times." I felt a surge of gratitude sometimes. The people who aren't family by blood are the ones who show up when you need them most. I slipped out the back door, suitcase in hand, and took one last look at the house. The garden was overgrown, the paint peeling in places, but it was still the place where I'd built my life. I whispered a quiet goodbye to my wife, promising her that I'd find a way to honor the love and respect we'd always shared. The walk to Frank's house was long, but it gave me time to think. With every step, I felt the weight of disappointment lift, replaced by a growing sense of freedom. I wasn't running away. I was choosing myself for the first time in a long time. I was reclaiming my right to peace, to dignity, to a life where I mattered. When I arrived, Frank greeted me with a bear hug and a cup of strong coffee. We sat on his porch, watching the sun set, and talked about everything and nothing. For the first time in weeks, I felt like myself again, seen, heard, and valued. That night, as I settled into the guest room, I realized that justice doesn't always look like revenge. Sometimes, it's as simple as walking away from what hurts you and choosing to start again. I didn't know what the future would hold, but I knew I'd made the right choice. I'd drawn a line not out of anger, but out of love for myself and the life I'd worked so hard to build. I drifted off to sleep with a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years, knowing that, for once, I'd put myself first, and as I closed my eyes, I knew that whatever happened next, I was ready to face it on my own terms. It didn't take long for my absence to be noticed. By midday, my phone began to buzz with calls and messages, first from David, then from Linda, and even from my eldest granddaughter, whose text simply read, "Grandpa, where are you?" I let the phone ring, needing time to gather my thoughts, to let the dust settle in my own mind before I faced the storm I knew was coming by evening. David's calls had turned frantic. I finally answered, sitting on Frank's porch as the sun dipped low behind the trees. His voice was sharp, a mix of confusion and anger. "Dad, what's going on? Where are you? Why did you just leave like that?" I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "I left because I needed to, David. I needed space. I needed to feel like I mattered in my own home." He was silent for a moment, then his frustration boiled over. "You could have talked to us. We were just trying to help, Dad. We thought you'd like having us around. The kids miss you already." Linda's worried sick. "Why didn't you say something before just walking out?" I closed my eyes, feeling the ache in his words, but also the truth in my own. "I tried, son. I tried to tell you how I felt, but no one was listening. Every decision was made without me. My home became your project, your solution, and I was just there. I felt invisible, David. I felt like a guest in the place I built with your mother, he sighed, the anger in his voice softening just a little. We didn't mean to make you feel that way. We just thought it would be easier for everyone. You're getting older, Dad. We wanted to be close, to help out. I shook my head, even though he couldn't see me. Wanting to help is one thing, but taking over is another. I've spent my whole life making sacrifices for this family. I've always put you first. But I can't keep giving up pieces of myself just to make things easier for everyone else. I need respect, David. I need to feel like I belong in my own home. There was a long pause, and I could hear the sounds of my grandchildren in the background. Laughter, footsteps, the clatter of dishes. For a moment, I wondered if I was being too harsh, if I was letting pretty get in the way of family. But then I remembered the look in Linda's eyes as she measured the curtains. The way David had brushed off my concerns, the feeling of being erased. David finally spoke, his voice quieter. So what now, Dad? Are you coming back? The kids want to see you. We can talk about this, figure something out. I let his words hang in the air, weighing them carefully. I don't know yet, son. I need time. I need to know that if I come back, things will be different, that my voice will matter, that I won't be pushed aside in my own house. He hesitated, then said, I understand. I'm sorry, Dad. I really am. We got carried away. We should have asked. We should have listened. I felt a lump rise in my throat, a mix of relief and sadness. Thank you, David. That's all I wanted, to be heard, to be respected. I love you, son. I love your family. But I can't come back until I know things will change. He promised to talk to Linda, to the kids, to make sure everyone understood. He asked if we could meet soon, just the two of us, to talk things through. I agreed, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. For the first time in a long while, I felt like my words had landed, like my feelings mattered. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet. Watching the last light fade from the sky, Frank came out and handed me a cup of tea, clapping me on the shoulder. You did the right thing, Joe, he said. Sometimes standing up for yourself is the hardest thing in the world. But it's the only way people learn to treat you right. I nodded, feeling the truth of his words settle deep inside me. I didn't know what would happen next, if David and his family would truly change, if I'd ever feel at home in my own house again. But I knew I'd taken the first step. I'd found my voice, and I'd used it. And that, more than anything, gave me hope for what was still to come. You won't believe what David said the next time we met. The days that followed were quieter than I'd expected, but not in the lonely way I'd feared. There was a peace in Frank's house that I hadn't felt in my own for a long time. We fell into an easy rhythm. Morning coffee on the porch, afternoons spent tending his vegetable patch. Evenings filled with stories and laughter that reminded me of simpler times. I realized how much I'd missed this kind of companionship, the kind that comes from being truly seen and valued, not just tolerated. Frank never pried, but he listened when I needed to talk. I told him about the years I'd spent building my home, about the dreams my wife and I had shared, about the pride I'd felt watching David grow into a man. I spoke of the sacrifices, the small joys, and the slow, creeping sense of being pushed aside. Frank nodded, understanding in his eyes. You gave them everything, Joe, but you can't pour from an empty cup. Sometimes you have to save a little for yourself. His words stuck with me. For so long, I'd believed that being a good father meant giving without limit. That love was measured in how much you could endure. But sitting there, surrounded by the gentle hum of a house that welcomed me, I began to see things differently. I started to believe that I was allowed to want respect, to need space, to draw boundaries, even with the people I loved most. A few days later, David called again. This time, his voice was softer, less hurried. He asked if we could meet just the two of us. I agreed, and we chose a quiet park where we could talk without interruption. When I arrived, I saw him sitting on a bench, his shoulders hunched, his hands twisting nervously in his lap. For a moment, he looked like the little boy I used to carry on my shoulders, the one who'd run to me after a scraped knee, trusting that I could make everything right, He stood as I approached, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said, "Dad, I'm sorry. I really am. I didn't realize how much we were taking over, how much we were asking of you. I thought we were helping, but I see now that we weren't listening. We made you feel like a guest in your own home, and that's not right." I nodded, feeling a mix of relief and sadness. "I know you meant well, David, but good intentions don't always make things right. I need to know that if I come back, things will be different, that my voice will matter, that I'll be respected in my own house." He promised me that things would change. He said he'd talk to Linda and the kids, that they understood now why I'd left, that they wanted me to come home, not as a caretaker or a spare room, but as the man who'd built that house, as the father and grandfather they loved. He asked what I needed to feel comfortable, to feel like I belonged again. For the first time in a long while, I felt hope. I told him I needed boundaries, my own space, my own routines, a say in the decisions that affected my life. I needed to know that my home would still feel like mine, that I wouldn't be pushed aside or ignored. David listened, really listened, and promised to honor those needs. We hugged before we parted. I felt some of the old warmth return. It wasn't a perfect fix, but it was a start. I realized that sometimes the hardest conversations are the ones that bring us back to each other, that teach us how to love better. With more honesty and respect, when I returned to Frank's house, I felt lighter. I spent a few more days there enjoying the quiet, letting myself heal. I called my sister, caught up with old friends, even joined Frank at the community center for a game of cards. I found joy in small things, a good meal, a shared laugh, the feeling of being wanted for who I was, not just for what I could give. Eventually, I did go back home. But this time, things were different. David and his family welcomed me with open arms, but they also gave me space. Linda asked for my opinion before making changes. The kids helped me in the garden, and David made sure I knew I was valued. We talked more, listened more, and slowly. The house began to feel like home again. I learned that setting boundaries isn't about shutting people out. It's about making room for respect, for understanding, for real connection. It's about standing up for yourself, even when it's hard, and trusting that the people who truly love you will listen and grow. If you're hearing my story and you've ever felt invisible in your own home, if you've ever been pushed aside by the people you love, I want you to know you're not alone. You have the right to draw your own lines, to demand respect, to find your place in the world, even if it means stepping away for a while. Sometimes, the family we choose, old friends, neighbors, even ourselves, are the ones who remind us of our worth. Never let anyone make you feel unwelcome in your own home. You are worthy of love, of respect, of a seat at the table. And if you have a story like mine, if you've found the courage to stand up for yourself, or if you're still searching for that strength, I hope you'll share it. We're all in this together, learning, growing, and finding our way back to ourselves. So tell me, what's your story?